Every day, a scruffy stray dog slips into a modest corner store, pilfering food in a way that might seem mischievous at first. But when the store's owner decides to follow this elusive bandit, what she discovers behind its theft will shatter her heart. Could there be a secret motive behind the dog's actions, one so deeply moving that it brings tears to even the most hardened soul? In the heart of a bustling neighborhood, nestled between time-worn brick buildings and vibrant street murals, stood a small family-run store that had been a local favorite for decades. Its windows displayed an assortment of fresh produce, baked goods, and everyday essentials, a haven of warmth amid the urban rush. The owner, Ms. Evelyn Carter, had inherited the store from her parents and prided herself on treating every customer like family. Yet, amid her daily routines and friendly banter with regulars, one peculiar occurrence had begun to capture her attention. Almost every afternoon, as the midday sun softened the sharp edges of the city, a scruffy stray dog would appear at her store's back entrance. With cautious, almost furtive steps, the dog would slip inside, darting among the aisles and snatching small parcels of food from the shelves. At first, Evelyn regarded the incident with mild irritation. After all, a few missing items here and there weren't uncommon in a busy neighborhood. However, the dog's behavior was different. It never caused a ruckus or seemed aggressive. Instead, it moved with a deliberate purpose, as if on a mission. Curiosity soon overcame frustration. One crisp afternoon, determined to put an end to what she assumed was mere thievery, Evelyn decided to follow the stray after it left her store. Keeping a safe distance in the quiet, sunlit alleyways, she trailed the dog as it padded along uneven pavement toward a narrow side street. What she witnessed next left her utterly speechless. The stray paused in front of a rundown building, its eyes fixed on a small, shadowed doorway. There, she saw the dog gently deposit the stolen food into a battered basket. Peering closer, Evelyn's heart began to race as she realized the basket was filled with meager offerings being carefully gathered, and in that moment, she understood. The dog wasn't stealing for its own sake. It was collecting food for someone else, for someone in desperate need. Overwhelmed by a mix of shock and tenderness, Evelyn's eyes welled up with tears. The sight of the stray's selfless act, driven by an unspoken compassion, transformed her initial annoyance into a deep, aching empathy. In that moment, standing in the quiet shadow of the alley, Evelyn understood that sometimes even the smallest creature can carry a message of hope and humanity that transcends ordinary life. After witnessing the stray dog's mysterious routine outside her family store, Evelyn Carter couldn't shake the image of the scruffy canine disappearing into the alley with its stolen loot. Over the following days, her initial frustration gradually gave way to a burning curiosity. Determined to understand the dog's motives, Evelyn began to discreetly observe its behavior from a distance. Every afternoon during a lull in the store's busy hours, she watched as the dog slipped in through the back door, carefully selecting and carrying away small packages of food. Though she had considered calling the police or dismissing the behavior as petty theft, something about the dog's gentle, almost deliberate manner made her pause and wonder. One warm, sunlit day, after closing the store a little earlier than usual, Evelyn decided to follow the dog. Clad in a simple jacket and carrying only her determination, she stepped quietly into the narrow, winding alley behind the store. The stray moved with surprising purpose, its tail wagging slightly as it navigated the maze of side streets. Keeping a safe distance, Evelyn trailed the animal, her heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. She followed as it turned onto a quiet, less traveled lane that led to a dilapidated building covered in peeling paint and overgrown ivy. There, in front of a shadowed, almost forgotten doorway, the dog came to a stop. Evelyn's eyes widened as she observed the animal carefully approach a battered metal basket left propped against the wall. With delicate precision, the stray began depositing the pilfered food, loaves of bread, scraps of meat, and even a few packets of crackers, into the basket. For several long moments, the dog sat motionless, as if ensuring that every item was placed with care, then slowly trotted away into the darkness. Stunned by what she had just witnessed, Evelyn hid behind a stack of discarded boxes and listened. Through the quiet murmur of distant traffic and the soft rustle of leaves, she could faintly hear hushed voices coming from within the building. Unable to contain her concern, she edged closer and peered through a grimy window. What she saw next made her heart sink and her eyes well up with tears. Inside, a frail, elderly man sat in a cramped, dimly lit room, surrounded by a scattering of belongings that spoke of long-forgotten hardships. The man, his face etched with sorrow and fatigue, was hunched over as he carefully gathered the food from the basket that had been delivered. His eyes, reflecting a mixture of gratitude and resignation, flickered briefly towards a small age-worn photograph pinned to the wall, a family picture, faded with time. In that moment, Evelyn realized that the stray dog's theft was not an act of mischief or hunger for itself, but a selfless effort to provide for someone in desperate need. Overwhelmed by the revelation, she felt a deep pang of empathy. Here was a creature, misunderstood by the world, performing a small act of kindness to feed a man who likely had no one else to care for him. The stark contrast between the bustling, indifferent life of the city and the quiet desperation hidden behind those grimy windows moved her to her core. Returning to her store with a heavy heart, Evelyn was a mix of emotions: anger for the injustices she had witnessed, sorrow for the lonely man she had glimpsed, and a profound sense of responsibility. The very next day, she decided to take action. Instead of reprimanding the dog as a petty thief, she resolved to learn more about the man behind the act. With gentle determination, she began asking around in the neighborhood. In whispered conversations with local residents, she discovered that the man, known only as Mr. Harlan Xiaos, had been living on the fringes ever since a personal tragedy years ago had left him isolated and forgotten. Evelyn reached out to a nearby shelter and a local community center that provided services for the elderly. Through careful inquiry and compassionate persistence, she learned more about Mr. Harlan's circumstances. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together. The stray dog, whose daily offerings had initially seemed like a nuisance, was, in fact, a silent guardian of hope, ensuring that Mr. Harlan received nourishment, even when he had no one else to turn to. That evening, as she closed up her store, Evelyn sat on the steps outside, the twilight painting the sky with soft hues of orange and pink. Her mind replayed the scene in the alley, the stray carefully filling the basket, the old man's solemn expression as he gathered the food. Tears welled up in her eyes as the weight of compassion and responsibility pressed upon her. She realized that sometimes, even in the smallest actions, there lies a story of deep humanity, a reminder that every life, no matter how overlooked, deserved care and kindness. Determined to honor the silent benevolence she had witnessed, Evelyn resolved to reach out to Mr. Harlan. In the days that followed, she arranged a discreet visit, offering him warm meals and a listening ear. Her store, once a simple business, was now becoming a bridge between the community and those who had been left behind. Evelyn's journey to understand the stray dog's motives had opened her eyes to the hidden layers of urban life, stories of hardship, resilience, and quiet generosity that often went unnoticed. And as she embarked on this new mission of compassion, she vowed to ensure that every act of kindness, no matter how small, would be nurtured and celebrated. In the days following her startling discovery in the alley, Evelyn Carter found herself unable to shake the powerful image of the stray dog's secret mission. The revelation that the dog wasn't merely stealing food for itself, but was carefully collecting it for Mr. Harlan, the frail elderly man living in a forgotten corner of the neighborhood, had ignited an inner resolve in her. Determined to bridge the gap between the compassionate act of the stray and the suffering of a man who had long been left to fend for himself, Evelyn set out on a new mission: to help Mr. Harlan and uncover the full story behind his isolation. Every day after the store's bustle quieted down, Evelyn would return to the spot where she'd first seen the stray's tender act. With a mix of apprehension and hope, she began to approach Mr. Harlan's dilapidated building. Each visit was a delicate dance between offering help and respecting his privacy. At first, Mr. Harlan was wary. His tired eyes and hesitant gestures told a story of past rejections and lost trust. But as the days passed, he began to accept Evelyn's gentle inquiries. Over cups of lukewarm tea at a local community center, he slowly shared fragments of his life, a once vibrant man who had fallen on hard times after a personal tragedy, leaving him estranged from family and society. His voice, low and trembling, revealed how he had retreated into solitude, relying on the stray dog's daily offerings as the only lifeline in his lonely existence. Evelyn's heart ached with each word he spoke. The realization that the kind-hearted dog had been operating as his sole provider struck her deeply. Here was a man who had been left behind by a society that often overlooked the elderly, and a stray dog that had taken it upon itself to provide for him in the only way it knew how. Determined to make a difference, Evelyn began to strategize on how best to help Mr. Harlan without overwhelming him. She reached out to local social services and community outreach programs, seeking resources that could offer Mr. Harlan a more stable living situation. Yet, every time she discussed his case with a social worker, a new conflict arose. Bureaucratic red tape, limited funds, and the ever-present challenge of preserving his dignity while offering assistance. At the same time, news of the stray dog's unusual behavior had started to ripple through the neighborhood. Some residents initially regarded the dog's theft as a nuisance, but when Evelyn quietly explained what she had witnessed, opinions began to shift. A few sympathetic neighbors came forward with their own observations. An elderly lady recalled how the stray always left a small bundle of food near a certain doorway, while a local shopkeeper mentioned that he had seen the dog gently cradling a worn-out basket as it passed by. These snippets of information helped Evelyn build a more complete picture of Mr. Harlan's world, a world where neglect had turned into survival, and where even a small act of kindness could mean the difference between starvation and a meager meal. Driven by a newfound sense of purpose, Evelyn decided to take a bold step. One early afternoon, she mustered the courage to knock on Mr. Harlan's door. With a gentle smile and a warm greeting, she introduced herself as someone who cared deeply about the community. At first, Mr. Harlan hesitated, his weathered face etched with skepticism and sorrow. But as Evelyn spoke with genuine empathy, sharing her own struggles to keep the store running and her belief in the power of community support, he slowly allowed his guard to drop. Over time, their brief conversations grew longer and more heartfelt. Mr. Harlan admitted that the stray dog's daily visits had been his only source of comfort, a small reminder that the world hadn't entirely forgotten him. "That dog," he murmured one day, his voice cracking with emotion, "has been more caring than any person in my life for a long time." Evelyn felt her eyes well up with tears at his confession. She realized that her mission was far more significant than simply curbing a case of food theft. It was about restoring dignity to a man who had been marginalized and ensuring that even the most overlooked members of the community received care. Determined to honor that quota, she began organizing small initiatives, arranging for nutritious meals to be delivered to Mr. Harlan's modest home, collaborating with local volunteers to check in on him regularly, and even starting a discreet fund to help cover his medical and living expenses. However, not everyone was supportive of Evelyn's newfound crusade. A few local business owners, concerned that her actions might bring unwanted attention to the neighborhood, expressed reservations about getting involved. They argued that the store's resources were already stretched thin and that her focus should remain on the business rather than on one isolated case. These criticisms stung Evelyn, but each time she recalled the gentle gratitude in Mr. Harlan's eyes, her resolve grew stronger. "If we don't look after our own," she would tell herself, "who will?" As Evelyn's efforts gained momentum, the stray dog continued its daily routine, oblivious to the profound impact it had sparked. Its consistent acts of kindness had become a symbol of hope, a quiet, unassuming reminder that even in a bustling, indifferent city, compassion could still find a way to shine through the cracks. Meanwhile, local media began to pick up on the heartwarming story, and Evelyn's gentle activism started to inspire others. Social media posts and local newspaper features celebrated the unlikely bond between a determined store owner, a stray dog, and an elderly man struggling to survive. The story, now transformed from an incident of petty theft into a powerful testament to community solidarity, began to shift public perception and draw attention to the broader issues of neglect and aging in the urban landscape. In the quiet moments after a long day at the store, as Evelyn closed the doors and locked them with a sigh of tired determination, She reflected on the journey so far. What began as irritation had blossomed into a mission of compassion, a mission that not only had the potential to change Mr. Harlan's life, but also to remind everyone that no one should be left behind. With every small act of kindness, she believed the community could heal its wounds and build a future where care and empathy were at the heart of every interaction. As the days passed since her first encounter with the stray dog and the revelation of Mr. Harlan's plight, Evelyn's curiosity transformed into an all-consuming need to understand the full story behind this mysterious benefactor. Though the sight of the dog's selfless act had already moved her to tears, a lingering question tugged at her. Why was Mr. Harlan, a seemingly forgotten old man living in such desperate isolation? And could there be more to his past than anyone had imagined? One afternoon, while restocking her store and glancing out the window at the narrow alley where the stray often disappeared, Evelyn overheard a hushed conversation between two long-time neighbors. They mentioned that Mr. Harlan was not always the reclusive figure she had encountered. According to their murmurs, decades ago he had been known as Harold Hal Mason, a well-respected community figure who once worked alongside her parents at the very store she now ran. Shocked by the possibility of this hidden connection, Evelyn's heart pounded with a mix of disbelief and determination. Had fate, in its mysterious ways, brought her to this moment? Evelyn resolved to dig deeper. That evening, after closing her store, she visited the local library, a place where old newspapers and community archives were kept. As she sifted through yellowed articles and faded photographs, Evelyn discovered startling records. Hal Mason had been a trusted employee and friend of her late parents, renowned for his kindness and dedication to the neighborhood. But then, tragedy struck. An unforeseen incident, a devastating personal loss, or perhaps a scandal that no one spoke of, had led to his ostracization and eventual disappearance from public life. The man she now knew as Mr. Harlan was, in fact, the same Hal Mason, forced into exile by circumstances too painful to recall. The revelation sent ripples through Evelyn's soul. Every memory of her parents' stories about Hal, his warm smile, his ready laugh, and the way he had once been the heart of the community flashed vividly before her eyes. As she pored over old photo albums and community bulletins, the pieces slowly clicked into place. Hal had been not only a valued colleague, but also a kind guardian who had quietly supported her family in times of need. And now, the stray dog's persistent delivery of food to his modest hideaway was not a random act of charity. It was a poignant message, a final, unspoken appeal from a man whose dignity had been stripped away by years of neglect and scandal. Determined to confirm her suspicions, Evelyn reached out to a few elderly patrons who remembered the old days. In tearful recollections shared over cups of strong coffee at a local diner, they recalled how Hal Mason had once been a pillar of the community, organizing charity drives, mentoring troubled youth, and always going the extra mile for neighbors. He was the kind of man who'd give you the shirt off his back, one patron whispered, his eyes glistening with nostalgia. But then, something terrible happened, and he was cast aside, forgotten by those he once helped. Each story deepened the mystery and lent a bittersweet layer to the current state of Mr. Harlan's existence. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Evelyn felt an overwhelming surge of responsibility. The stray dog's daily ritual, once merely an oddity, now seemed like a symbol of a broken promise, a promise that Hal Mason had once embodied, now reduced to a shadow of his former self. Late one evening, while closing up her store, Evelyn gathered her courage and decided to pay Mr. Harlan a visit. With a mix of apprehension and compassion, she made her way to the dilapidated building in the narrow alley, where the stray dog had been seen delivering food. When Evelyn knocked tentatively on the creaking door, a frail voice answered from within. "Who's there?" came a whisper, barely audible. "It's Evelyn Carter," she replied softly, trying to steady her voice. After a long, tense pause, the door opened just a crack, and through the dim light she saw an older man whose eyes held both pain and a flicker of recognition. I knew your family," he stuttered. In that fragile moment, Evelyn realized that the man before her was indeed Hal Mason, the beloved figure from her childhood stories, now weathered by hardship and sorrow. As Hal invited her inside, Evelyn's eyes welled up with tears, not solely from the anguish of his current state, but from the poignant reunion of a past she had thought lost forever. In his meager living space, adorned with faded photographs and remnants of happier times, Hal explained in a trembling voice how life had taken a cruel turn. He spoke of betrayal, isolation, and the gradual erosion of his once robust spirit. The stray dog, he confided, had been his sole connection to a world that had abandoned him. That dog, it's like a silent reminder that someone still cared, he murmured, his voice cracking with emotion. This revelation was a turning point for Evelyn. Not only had she uncovered the secret history of Mr. Harlan, Hal Mason, but she now understood the deeper meaning behind the stray dog's actions. It was a call to restore the dignity of a man who had once been the heart of her community, and to honor a legacy of compassion that had been unjustly buried by time and misfortune. With her heart heavy yet resolute, Evelyn vowed to help Hal reclaim his rightful place in the community. She promised to reopen channels of support, to share his story with the world, and to transform her store into a hub of kindness and remembrance. In that moment, the stray dog's once mysterious behavior became a beacon, a symbol of lost connections rekindled and the enduring power of compassion to bridge even the widest gaps. The shocking discovery that Mr. Harlan was in fact Hal Mason, a once beloved community figure now cast aside, sent ripples of disbelief and raw emotion through Evelyn Carter's world. As she sat in the quiet back room of her store that evening, the weight of the revelation pressed upon her like a tangible force. Every old photograph and faded newspaper clipping she had uncovered seemed to echo with memories of a past filled with kindness, lost in time. Tears blurred her vision as she replayed the details of her visit to the dilapidated building, where the frail voice of Hal had trembled with regret and sorrow. In the days that followed, Evelyn found herself reeling from conflicting emotions. At first, she felt a surge of anger, not only for the injustice done to Hal, but also for a society that had allowed a gentle soul to be forgotten. Yet, alongside the anger was an overwhelming compassion. Determined to restore his dignity, she resolved to help Hal reclaim his identity and place within the community. However, this mission was far from simple. Evelyn quickly discovered that adjusting to this new reality meant confronting not only her own painful memories of loss, but also the skepticism and indifference of others. Hal, for his part, reacted to the unveiling of his true identity with a quiet mix of shame and relief. At the moment of reunion, when Evelyn's gentle knock had opened the creaking door and his eyes had met hers, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of the years lost. "I used to be known as Hal Mason," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper as he sat in his cramped, dimly lit living space adorned with relics of better times. The man before her was frail, his once vibrant eyes now dimmed by hardship. Yet in that vulnerable confession, Hal revealed a longing to be remembered, not as Mr. Harlan, the ghost of a man forced into isolation, but as Hal Mason, a pillar of community compassion and generosity. News of Hal's true identity began to ripple through the neighborhood. At first, longtime residents recalled in hushed tones the stories they had heard about Hal Mason, a man who had once organized charity drives, lent a hand to anyone in need, and even shared his modest earnings with those less fortunate. When these memories resurfaced, they sparked a mixture of nostalgia and outrage. How could such a kind man be cast aside, questioned one elderly neighbor during a small community meeting held in a local church basement. Others expressed a desire to help restore his dignity, insisting that the community must rally around him as a symbol of lost values and hope. Evelyn, sensing that the revelation could serve as a catalyst for change, began to actively engage with local groups. She reached out to community organizers, church leaders, and even the local council, sharing Hal's story and urging them to support a plan for his reintegration. "We have an opportunity here," she declared during one impassioned town meeting, her voice trembling with both grief and resolve. "Hal Mason isn't just a forgotten name. He is a living reminder of a time when our community stood together. We must honor him, and in doing so, we honor every act of kindness that makes our world a better place." At the same time, Hal struggled with his own inner demons. In quiet moments, he would stare at a faded family photograph he kept hidden in a battered wooden box, remembering better days when he was a respected member of the community. Now, the scars of neglect and isolation were all too evident. Yet, even as the pain of the past weighed on him, he began to see a glimmer of possibility in Evelyn's determined kindness. In a tentative conversation during one of their visits, he admitted, "I never thought anyone would care enough to remember me. But you've given me hope that maybe I can be more than this shadow of a man I've become." Her words, gentle and affirming, were the first seeds of self-worth to take root in his broken spirit. As Evelyn worked to bridge the gap between the Hal of old and the man he had become, she also encountered resistance. Some local business owners, concerned about the potential disruption to the neighborhood's image, voiced their skepticism about reviving a story from the past. "It's all well and good to remember a nice old story," one businessman grumbled during a community luncheon. "But the present is what matters. We can't dwell on nostalgia when we have real problems to solve." These criticisms stung, but they also steeled Evelyn's determination. She knew that if the community could embrace Hal's true identity, it would send a powerful message about the value of compassion and the importance of honoring one's heritage. Meanwhile, a small but growing group of residents, spurred on by Evelyn's impassioned advocacy, began organizing support initiatives. Volunteers set up a modest outreach program to assist not only Hal, but also other elderly community members who had fallen through the cracks. They held weekly gatherings, where stories of the past were shared, and plans were made to provide practical help such as meals, transportation, and medical care. In one particularly moving session, an elderly lady tearfully recounted how Hal had once helped her family in a time of need. "He was the heart of our community," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "It's time we give back to a man who gave so much." Evelyn's store also began to transform into more than just a place of business. It evolved into a community hub, a space where neighbors gathered to share stories, celebrate old memories, and forge a new future rooted in kindness. Brightly colored bulletin boards filled with information about local support services and community events adorned the walls. Evelyn's own warm smile and genuine interest in every person who walked through her door helped soften even the most skeptical hearts. In the midst of these sweeping changes, the stray dog continued its daily ritual, unaware of the profound impact its actions had unleashed every time it trotted past the store and toward the little basket at Mr. Harlan's door. It became a living symbol of hope and the quiet power of empathy. Its unwavering dedication served as a reminder that sometimes even the smallest act can ignite a flame that brings light to the darkest corners of our lives. In the wake of her heart-wrenching discovery and the stirring connection between the stray dog and Mr. Harlan, Evelyn's life began to unravel in unexpected ways. While she had resolved to help Mr. Harlan, a new set of complications started emerging. Challenges that not only tested her determination, but also threatened to upend the fragile balance she was trying to restore in her community. Late one afternoon, as Evelyn tidied up her store after closing time, she noticed that the stray dog was not alone this time. A second dog, a lean, timid creature with matted fur, was seen lingering near the back door. At first, she assumed it was simply a companion of the first stray, but over the next few days, the two dogs were frequently seen together, sometimes separated by a short distance, other times cautiously sharing stolen morsels. Evelyn's curiosity deepened as she began to wonder if there was more to this canine pair than met the eye. Could the second dog be connected to Mr. Harlan as well? Or was it perhaps a victim of the same harsh circumstances? The presence of the new dog added an unforeseen layer to the mystery, complicating her mission to understand the stray's motivations. Simultaneously, Evelyn started receiving mixed reactions from her loyal customers and neighbors. While many praised her for her compassion and for taking the time to follow up on the stray's actions, a small faction of local business owners expressed concerns that her focus on Mr. Harlan's plight might distract from the store's core operations. "We run a business here, not a charity," one skeptical shop owner remarked during a community luncheon. Such comments stung Evelyn deeply, adding a subplot of internal conflict. She felt torn between her responsibilities as a business owner, ensuring that her store remained profitable, and her growing commitment to use her platform to foster community compassion and to help those in need. This tension forced her to re-examine her priorities and question whether she could sustain both roles simultaneously. As Evelyn wrestled with these external criticisms, another challenge emerged from within her own family. Her adult daughter, Lisa, who had recently returned to town after several years away, expressed frustration over what she perceived as Evelyn's distraction from more practical concerns. "Mom, you're spending all your time chasing after stray dogs and old stories," Lisa scolded one evening as they sat for dinner. "What about your future, or our family business? You can't keep pouring your heart into every lost soul without consequences." The confrontation left Evelyn feeling isolated, caught between the expectations of modern business sensibilities and her intrinsic desire to help. This familial subplot not only added emotional complexity, but also forced her to reconcile her past values with the demands of her present reality. Meanwhile, the local media, having caught wind of the unusual bond between the stray dog and Mr. Harlan, began to pay closer attention. A rival journalist, eager for a sensational scoop, started publishing speculative articles that hinted at a hidden scandal behind the store owner's benevolent actions. These stories questioned whether Evelyn was using Mr. Harlan's plight for personal gain or publicity, inadvertently casting a shadow over her genuine efforts. The negative press stirred unrest in the community, with some residents beginning to doubt her motives, while others rallied to her side. The mixed media coverage intensified the pressure on Evelyn, as she now had to contend not only with external challenges, but also with a battle for public opinion. In an effort to counter the rising tide of skepticism, Evelyn decided to host a small community meeting at her store, inviting local residents, business owners, and even a few social service representatives. She openly shared Mr. Harlan's story, the significance of the stray dog's actions, and her plans to create a support network for those in need. The meeting, held on a cool evening under strings of warm, glowing lights in the store's small parking lot, was a mix of hope and tension. Many attendees expressed their heartfelt support, recounting personal stories of struggle and the importance of community compassion. Yet, a few voices still questioned the practicality of her vision. "It's all very touching," one attendee commented, "but how do you plan to keep the store running if you turn it into a charity hub?" Such questions underscored the difficult balance Evelyn needed to maintain between preserving her business's financial health and nurturing the soul of her community. Amid these converging challenges, the stray dog's behavior continued to evolve. The arrival of the second dog, whose presence hinted at a possible pack or a network of strays working together, became a symbol of the larger problem of urban neglect. Neighbors began noticing more stray dogs in the area, and whispers spread that the local authorities had been neglecting animal control issues. This new subplot hinted at systemic neglect, raising broader questions about how the community cared for its most vulnerable, both human and animal. Evelyn found herself at the crossroads of multiple narratives, one of personal redemption, one of familial discord, and one of community struggle. Every day, as she balanced the demands of her store, the skepticism of her peers, and the needs of Mr. Harlan and the stray dogs, she realized that her mission was far from simple. It was a multifaceted challenge that required not only a generous heart, but also resilience, determination, and a willingness to face harsh criticisms. With each passing day, Evelyn's resolve deepened. She knew that the stray dogs, with their unspoken acts of kindness, were more than just a curiosity. They were a wake-up call to a community in need of empathy. And as she looked into the eyes of those who doubted her, as well as those who supported her, she made a silent promise that she would not be swayed by cynicism or practical obstacles. Her store and her family and her community deserved a future where compassion and practicality could coexist. In the weeks that followed her discovery of the stray dog's secret mission, Evelyn found herself caught in a web of conflicting emotions and responsibilities that challenged every facet of her life. Each day, as she balanced the demands of running her family store with the urgent need to help Mr. Harlan, She was forced to confront the deeper complexities of compassion in a modern, pragmatic world. Late one evening, after closing her store, Evelyn sat alone in the quiet back room, the soft hum of the overhead lights mingling with the persistent echo of distant traffic. Her thoughts swirled around the events of that day, how the stray dog had stealthily delivered food to Mr. Harlan's hidden doorway, and how the old man's weary eyes had sparkled with a glimmer of hope as he received the meal. Yet, as much as these moments filled her with warmth, they also reminded her of the harsh realities of neglect and isolation. With every passing hour, Evelyn wrestled with an inner conflict. How could she continue to nurture this newfound compassion without jeopardizing the survival of her store and the expectations of her skeptical family? The strain of these dual responsibilities began to show. At a weekly staff meeting, a heated conversation erupted between Evelyn and one of her longtime employees, Maria. "Evelyn, we all admire your heart, but our customers are noticing that you're distracted," Maria said sharply. "The store's performance is slipping, and we're losing business. How do you plan to keep our livelihood intact while chasing after every stray story?" The comment stung deeply, forcing Evelyn to acknowledge the practical pressures of maintaining a successful business. She paused, her eyes welling up as she tried to explain, "I know it's not easy, but sometimes caring for our community is what gives us the strength to survive. I believe that by helping Mr. Harlan, we're also helping to restore a sense of humanity that, in turn, benefits all of us." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging between them as both empathy and pragmatic concern clashed in the air. At home that night, Evelyn's daughter, Lisa, confronted her over dinner. "Mom, you're risking everything on what seems like just a sentimental story," Lisa said, her tone a mix of frustration and worry. "We have bills to pay and responsibilities to our customers. I understand you care, but you can't let your heart override our practical needs." Lisa's words cut deep, reflecting a generational clash between idealism and realism. Though Evelyn tried to reassure her, she couldn't help but feel the sting of doubt. Was she sacrificing the stability of her family business for a cause that might be unsustainable in the long run? In the midst of these personal battles, the stray dog continued its daily routine with unyielding persistence. Each afternoon, as it trotted along the familiar path toward Mr. Harlan's doorway, it carried not just stolen food, but also a quiet message of hope and resilience. Neighbors began noticing the dog's presence, and a few even expressed admiration for its determination. Yet not everyone was moved. Some remained indifferent or even resentful, viewing the dog's actions as an inconvenience that disrupted the order of their busy lives. This mix of admiration, apathy, and criticism further complicated Evelyn's emotional landscape, as she struggled to reconcile her deep empathy with the less than unanimous response of her community. One particularly stormy afternoon, while Evelyn prepared to make her routine visit to Mr. Harlan's building, she encountered an unexpected setback. The narrow alley behind her store, usually quiet and predictable, was now filled with a small group of local youths who were spraying graffiti on the wall near the entrance. Their boisterous laughter and careless disregard for the environment struck Evelyn as emblematic of the neglect and apathy that had allowed Mr. Harlan and others like him to fall through society's cracks. Overwhelmed by the scene, Evelyn felt a surge of despair. "How can people be so indifferent?" she whispered to herself, her voice trembling with sorrow and frustration. That moment forced her to confront the broader question. In a world that often overlooks the suffering of its most vulnerable, how does one maintain hope and act with compassion when faced with such callousness? Torn between anger and the resolve to make a difference, Evelyn sought solace in her community outreach work. At a small neighborhood meeting organized at the local community center, she shared her experiences and the story of the stray dog and Mr. Harlan. The room was filled with a diverse mix of voices: elderly residents, working-class families, and even some young activists. Emotions ran high as people debated the best way to help their community while ensuring the survival of small businesses like Evelyn's. "We need to support each other," one elderly gentleman declared, "because every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change a life." His words resonated with many, yet they also underscored the difficult balance between idealism and practical reality. Throughout these interactions, Evelyn's internal dialogue grew louder. Late at night, in the quiet solitude of her office, she would revisit old letters from her parents that spoke of community, resilience, and the importance of standing together in times of need. Their words, both a comfort and a challenge, reinforced her belief that compassion was not a luxury but a necessity, an essential ingredient for rebuilding a community. "We must nurture our hearts even as we protect our livelihoods," she wrote in her journal, acknowledging that the path ahead would be fraught with difficult choices. The emotional dilemmas that Evelyn faced were mirrored in the subtle changes within her store. Once a simple retail space, it gradually transformed into a community hub, a place where customers began to share their own stories of hardship and hope. Bulletin boards filled with local news and information about social services appeared alongside shelves of goods, symbolizing a quiet, organic blending of commerce and care. Each day, as Evelyn greeted her customers with a warm smile, she silently vowed that her store would not only be a place for business, but also a beacon of compassion. In this turbulent interplay of personal sacrifice, community skepticism, and the relentless drive to do what was right, Evelyn realized that the true challenge lay not in the act of following a stray dog, but in the struggle to balance the heart's longing for compassion with the harsh realities of daily life. It was a battle of ideals versus pragmatism, of empathy clashing with economic necessity, a battle that was both deeply personal and profoundly communal. In the weeks following the community meeting and the initial steps Evelyn took to help Mr. Harlan, a subtle yet ominous shift began to ripple through the neighborhood. It started one chilly evening when, after closing the store, Evelyn discovered a plain, unmarked envelope slipped under her door. The envelope contained a single typed note. "Some secrets are meant to stay hidden. Stop digging or you will regret it." The message, brief and devoid of any signature, sent a shudder down her spine. It was a stark, unsettling reminder that the simple act of following a stray dog had uncovered more than just a story of compassion. It had disturbed a force that preferred its dark deeds to remain concealed. That very night, as Evelyn sat alone in her back office, the soft hum of the store's cooling system underscoring the silence, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the building and rustle of the wind outside seemed laden with hidden menace. In the following days, her instincts proved prescient. Unusual figures were spotted lingering near her store after closing, and a local customer mentioned seeing a dark sedan idling by the side of the alley where Mr. Harlan's building stood. At the same time, social media buzz surrounding the story began to swell. What started as gentle curiosity about the stray dog's thievery now carried undertones of fear and defiance. Evelyn's sympathetic posts about Mr. Harlan and the dog had gone viral, garnering support from compassionate neighbors, but they had also attracted negative attention. Her few online accounts, cloaked in anonymity, began posting veiled threats and urging her to mind her own business. The comments, laced with hostility, made it clear that not everyone was pleased with the unfolding exposure of the neighborhood's hidden struggles. One afternoon, while checking inventory in her store, Evelyn noticed that a section of the back wall near the entrance had been defaced with crude, spray-painted symbols and words that she later learned translated roughly to "shame on you." It appeared as though someone, perhaps connected to the secretive forces behind Mr. Harlan's past, was trying to intimidate her into silence. The escalating signs of harassment began to weigh on her. Each new threat, whether physical or digital, made her more determined yet increasingly cautious about how much she could reveal. At the local community center, where the support network for vulnerable residents was gathering momentum, a heated discussion erupted among the attendees. A young activist, visibly agitated, demanded, "We cannot let these shadowy forces intimidate us. If they want to silence the truth, we must push even harder to expose every detail." His words were met with both cheers and cautious glances. Many older residents remembered times when speaking out had come at a heavy cost. Councilwoman Ramirez, one who had been a pillar of support, urged a balanced approach. "I understand the passion," she said, her tone measured yet firm, "but we must ensure our safety. We need to document every incident meticulously and work closely with the police. Our goal is to protect our community, not provoke a dangerous backlash." That evening, during a strategy session in the community center's modest conference room, Evelyn was invited to share her experiences. With a trembling voice, she recounted the anonymous note and the subsequent vandalism. "I'm scared," she admitted, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I also believe that if we let fear control us, we'll never honor the kindness that this stray dog represents. We have to keep going, even if it means standing alone." Her courage resonated with many in the room, and a consensus slowly emerged. They needed to form a dedicated task force to monitor any further threats and work with local law enforcement to ensure their safety. In a parallel development, Sarah, the investigative journalist who had been chronicling every twist of the story, found herself under pressure from both her editors and unknown sources. Late one night in her cramped apartment, as she sifted through more anonymous emails and phone messages, Sarah received another cryptic warning. "If you keep digging, you'll be the next target." Her heart pounded as she replayed the message over and over. This new threat was more personal, more direct, and it confirmed that powerful interests were deeply invested in keeping certain secrets buried. Despite the danger, Sarah resolved to continue her investigation, now more aware than ever that the story was bigger than any one person. Meanwhile, Mr. Harlan, revealed to the community as the once-forgotten Hal Mason, began to show signs of both physical and emotional strain. During one of Evelyn's visits, he confided in a shaky voice that he had noticed unfamiliar vehicles parked near his building on multiple occasions. "I feel like I'm being watched," he whispered, eyes darting nervously to the darkened street outside. His increasing anxiety added a new layer of urgency to Evelyn's mission. She realized that protecting him was now not only a matter of community service, but also a personal responsibility to a man who had once been cherished. The tension escalated further when a break-in was reported at a nearby community center, a center that had been a rallying point for local support groups. Windows had been smashed and threatening notes left behind. Rumors spread quickly that the vandalism was linked to the same mysterious network behind the harassment at Evelyn's store. Fear mingled with determination among the community members. While some were terrified of what might come next, others saw it as proof that their adversaries were active and dangerous, and that their cause was just. As these events converged, Evelyn found herself at a crossroads. The delicate balance between running her store, caring for Mr. Harlan, and speaking out against the darkness threatening to engulf her community now seemed more precarious than ever. Every new threat, whether a spray-painted message on a wall or a chilling email, fueled both her fear and her resolve. She began to work more closely with local law enforcement, offering detailed accounts of each incident, and started holding regular meetings with community leaders to strategize their next moves. In this maelstrom of escalating tension, hidden agendas, and public unrest, the stray dog's daily ritual continued unabated. Each time it trotted past the store and delivered its humble bounty, it served as a silent beacon of hope, a reminder that even amidst growing chaos, there existed a simple, unyielding act of kindness that refused to be extinguished. And though Evelyn's nights were now haunted by worries and threats, her determination only grew stronger. The stakes were higher, and the fight for truth and compassion had entered a new, dangerous phase. In the wake of the growing threats and escalating tension, the community began to reveal its true colors, both in its divisions and in its emerging unity. As Evelyn struggled with the dual pressures of keeping her store afloat and championing the cause of Mr. Harlan, she also discovered unexpected allies and unexpected foes among her neighbors. The anonymous threats and vandalism had not only unsettled her, but had sparked heated debates within the local business community. Some fellow store owners expressed cautious support for her compassion-driven mission, while others worried that her actions might tarnish the neighborhood's reputation and hurt commerce. This tension, however, soon transformed into a catalyst for deeper connections and a reawakening of communal spirit. Late one evening, after a particularly unsettling day marked by fresh graffiti on her back wall and another threatening email, Evelyn received a visit from Miss Olivia Reed, a soft-spoken but determined leader of a local community outreach group. Olivia had long been working with the city's underprivileged and saw in Evelyn's struggle a mirror of her own passion for social justice. "Evelyn, Olivia said gently as they sat together in the back office of the store. "Your story isn't just about a stray dog or one forgotten man. It's about how we, as a community, choose to care for one another. I want to help you set up a program to support not just Mr. Harlan, but all those who have been left behind." This conversation planted a seed of hope in Evelyn, and soon a tentative partnership was forged that promised to extend the store's role beyond commerce into a hub of community support. At the same time, Evelyn's strained relationship with her daughter Lisa began to show signs of mending. Lisa, who had earlier criticized her mother's focus on sentimental causes, slowly came to understand the deeper impact of Evelyn's actions. One cool evening, after the store had closed and the soft glow of streetlights filtered through the windows, Lisa joined her mother for a quiet conversation in the back room. "Mom," she began hesitantly, "I was wrong to dismiss what you're doing. I see now that your compassion is helping people, and that it might be the key to bringing our community together." The sincerity in Lisa's voice was a balm to Evelyn's wounded spirit, and their renewed bond became a pillar of strength as they worked together to balance business demands with charitable endeavors. Meanwhile, the local media continued to cover the unfolding story, and Sarah's investigative reports had not only won public sympathy, but also attracted the attention of influential community figures. At a town hall meeting organized by Councilwoman Ramirez, now more determined than ever to protect vulnerable residents, a diverse group of citizens gathered. Among them were former employees, local activists, and even some initially skeptical business owners who had come to see firsthand the impact of neglect on their community. During the meeting, a middle-aged man recounted how he had once witnessed Mr. Harlan Hal Mason being shunned by those in power, and his testimony resonated deeply with many. "I remember Hal as a man who always lent a hand," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "It breaks my heart to see him reduced to this state, and it reminds us that our community must stand together to protect our own." His words spurred an outpouring of support, and the meeting ended with a pledge to form a local task force aimed at improving services for the elderly and marginalized. At the same time, the stray dog, whose unwavering daily ritual had become the silent emblem of hope, continued to work its quiet magic. Customers at Evelyn's store began to notice that each time the dog trotted past, it seemed to carry a message of perseverance. Some even started leaving small tokens, bottled water, bits of food, or handwritten notes, by the back door, creating an impromptu display of solidarity. This grassroots movement, sparked by a simple act of kindness, was amplified by social media. Local residents shared photos and stories online, and soon hashtags like Dark Kindness, In the Alley and Hope from the Heart trended in the community. These posts not only painted a picture of communal unity, but also pressured local officials to pay more attention to the plight of those left in the shadows. In one particularly moving episode, during a community outreach event organized at the store's small parking lot, Olivia Reed introduced a program that paired volunteers with elderly residents like Mr. Harlan. Volunteers, ranging from college students to retirees, visited homes to deliver groceries, offer companionship, and help with basic chores. At that event, a tearful Mr. Harlan publicly thanked Evelyn and the volunteers for restoring a sense of dignity to his life. "For years, I felt invisible," he said, his voice trembling with gratitude. "Now, thanks to all of you, I feel seen and cared for." His words were met with resounding applause and served as a powerful testament to the transformative power of community compassion. Evelyn, buoyed by these positive developments, began to see her store in a new light. It was no longer just a place to buy goods. It had evolved into a center for community connection, a living space where business and benevolence coexisted. Bulletin boards now displayed information about local support services, community events, and stories of neighbors helping neighbors. The store's daily rhythm had subtly shifted. While the registers still rang with the sound of transactions, there was also the sound of laughter, shared stories, and even quiet moments of reflection on the importance of caring for one another. Yet, even as the community forged these new bonds, Evelyn knew that the threat of intimidation still loomed. The anonymous messages and suspicious activity near the store were constant reminders that dark forces opposed their burgeoning movement. Late one night, while closing up the store, Evelyn found a small handwritten note slipped under the door, a reminder that some secrets were not eager to be uncovered. Although the note's ominous tone sent a shiver down her spine, she clutched it tightly as a symbol of the very challenges they were fighting against. It only deepened her resolve. If they could unite as a community in the face of such threats, then no force could silence the call for compassion. As the days turned into weeks, the connection among the characters grew ever stronger. Evelyn, Lisa, Mr. Harlan's Olivia Reed, and the many community members who had rallied around them became part of a tightly knit network determined to foster a safer, kinder neighborhood. Each new alliance and every small act of solidarity reinforced the belief that change was not only possible, it was already underway. One brisk autumn evening, tensions that had been simmering for weeks finally converged at a crowded town hall meeting held in the community center, a converted space that now pulsed with both hope and palpable fear. Evelyn had called the meeting after receiving multiple anonymous threats and observing increasing harassment around her store. The purpose was to address growing concerns about her community outreach initiative, which had evolved from simply following a stray dog to becoming a lifeline for Mr. Harlan and others in need. But as the meeting commenced, it became clear that deep divisions had taken root in the neighborhood. At the front of the room, Councilwoman Ramirez began her address with a forceful declaration. "We are at a crossroads. Our community stands on the brink, between progress driven by profit and a future built on compassion and care for our own. We cannot let intimidation and greed push us into silence." Her words were met with a mix of fervent applause and cautious murmurs. Yet almost immediately, a local business owner, Mr. Thompson, a man known for his pragmatic approach and concern for commerce, rose to challenge her. "While I understand the sentiment," he argued sharply, "we cannot allow our small businesses to be jeopardized by idealism. Evelyn's outreach might be noble, but it is also affecting our livelihoods. We need stability, not sentimental distractions." His tone, laced with practical concerns, ignited a heated debate between those who saw the initiative as a beacon of hope and those who viewed it as an economic liability. As voices clashed, Evelyn's heart pounded with anxiety. She listened as some attendees passionately recounted how the community outreach had transformed lives, stories of local elders finding companionship and vulnerable residents receiving unexpected help. Others, however, questioned whether such endeavors could be sustained without undermining the neighborhood's economic stability. "How can we balance empathy with pragmatism?" someone asked, the question hanging in the charged air. Midway through the tumultuous discussion, a sudden interruption silenced the room. Evelyn's phone vibrated on the podium, and when she glanced at the screen, her breath caught in her throat. It was a text message that read simply, "Stop now or you'll pay the price." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. The anonymous threat, stark and unforgiving, confirmed that dark forces were willing to intervene if the truth continued to be revealed. The message cast an ominous pall over the meeting, as even those previously on the fence now recognized that the stakes were far higher than a simple debate over charity versus commerce. In that charged moment, Mr. Harlan, known to most only as the quiet, withdrawn figure who received the stray dog's food, rose unexpectedly from his seat near the front. His weathered face, usually hidden in sorrow, was now set with a determined expression. "I was once known as Hal Mason," he declared, his voice trembling yet resolute. "I was a proud member of this community, a man who helped others when I had little, but I was cast aside, forgotten in the shadows. Today I stand before you not as a charity case, but as a living testament to the power of compassion. If we let fear dictate our actions, then we lose not only our dignity but our humanity." His heartfelt words sent a ripple of emotion through the room. Many eyes welled with tears as the truth of his transformation resonated deeply. As the meeting erupted into an impassioned mix of support and protest, Evelyn felt the full weight of responsibility pressing upon her. She realized that her mission, what had begun as a simple attempt to stop a stray's theft, had evolved into a battle for the soul of the community. The conflicting opinions were no longer abstract debates. They were personal. Every voice, every tear shed, was a call to defend the values that the stray dog's quiet kindness had symbolized. In the midst of the chaos, another unsettling development emerged. A young woman in the audience, visibly shaken, stood up and recounted that she had seen an unfamiliar dark sedan parked repeatedly outside Evelyn's store in recent weeks. "I fear that those behind these threats are not only trying to silence our voices, but also to intimidate those who dare to show compassion," she said, her voice wavering with emotion. Her testimony added urgency to the situation, reminding everyone that the battle was not merely ideological, it was dangerous. The tension in the room reached a fever pitch as more community members voiced their fears and frustrations. Some demanded that the city provide immediate security measures to protect local businesses and vulnerable residents alike. Others rallied behind the cause, insisting that if they surrendered to intimidation, they would all lose something irreplaceable. Evelyn, standing at the center of the storm, felt tears prick her eyes as the gravity of the situation sank in. The anonymous threats, the economic debates, and the raw testimony of a man once known as Hal Mason all coalesced into a defining moment that demanded decisive action. That night, as the meeting adjourned in a mix of hopeful determination and lingering apprehension, Evelyn walked home beneath the cold glow of streetlights. Every step she took echoed with the voices of the community, the cries for justice, the whispers of fear, and the resounding calls for compassion. The stray dog's image flashed in her mind, a small creature performing an act of quiet defiance in a world rife with cruelty. In that moment, Evelyn vowed that she would not be silenced. She would stand firm, fight for Mr. Harlan's dignity, and work to forge a future where empathy and pragmatism could coexist. In the weeks following the impassioned town hall meeting, the simmering tensions within the community reached a boiling point. The threats, the vandalism, and the fervor over Mr. Harlan's true identity had polarized local opinions and forced difficult choices upon everyone involved. At the center of it all was Evelyn Carter, whose resolve to protect the vulnerable and honor the legacy of Hal Mason was now being tested by both external forces and internal conflicts. One crisp evening, as the golden hues of dusk faded into deep blue shadows, Evelyn convened an urgent meeting with key community stakeholders in the back room of her store. The room, lined with bulletin boards now filled with photos of the stray dog, newspaper clippings, and handwritten messages of support, buzzed with a palpable mix of determination and anxiety. Among the attendees were Councilwoman Ramirez, representatives from the local outreach group led by Olivia Reed, a few dedicated business owners, and even a couple of concerned residents whose voices had grown louder after hearing Hal Mason's story. Councilwoman Ramirez took the floor, her voice steady but forceful. "We are at a crossroads," she declared. "Our community is under threat not only from economic forces that seek to erase our history, but also from those who would intimidate us into silence. Evelyn's initiative has shown us that even a single act of kindness can spark a movement. But we must decide now. Do we allow these dark forces to control our future, or do we stand together and shape a destiny based on compassion and mutual respect?" Her words ignited a flurry of reactions. One local business owner, Mr. Thompson, argued with measured pragmatism, "We all understand the value of community. However, our livelihoods depend on a stable environment. If we let these issues spiral, the economic fallout could be devastating. We need a plan that supports both our social and financial well-being." His comments were met with nods from some, but others shook their heads in dismay, insisting that sacrificing humanity for profit was a price too high. Amid the debate, Evelyn herself felt the weight of the decision. She recalled every moment that had led her to this point, from following the stray dog to discovering Mr. Harlan's true identity, to witnessing the community's mixed responses. With a trembling yet determined voice, she addressed the group. "I have always believed that our store is more than a place to sell goods. It is a haven of connection." Hal Mason's story, revealed through the compassionate actions of that stray dog, reminds us that every person here deserves dignity. I know there are concerns about our economic future, but if we lose sight of our humanity, we lose everything. Her words, raw and heartfelt, resonated in the quiet moments that followed. As the discussion intensified, a pressing decision emerged regarding the future of the Community Outreach Initiative. Olivia Reed, standing up from the back of the room, proposed a bold compromise. "Let's transform this initiative into a structured program," she suggested. "We can create a community support fund that not only provides immediate help to people like Mr. Harlan, but also ensures that our local businesses can thrive. We need to secure grants, partner with local charities, and even work with the City Council to formalize this as part of our neighborhood safety net." Her proposal, though ambitious, was met with cautious optimism. Several members of the group voiced their support, noting that a well-organized program could bridge the gap between compassion and commerce. At that pivotal moment, a young activist, visibly moved by the discussion, stood up and said, "We've been threatened, intimidated, and divided, but today I see that our strength lies in unity. We cannot allow fear to dictate our future. I vote that we form a task force dedicated to not only protecting our vulnerable neighbors, but also ensuring that our community retains its soul." The room erupted into murmurs of agreement, with many individuals expressing their readiness to volunteer time and resources to make the vision a reality. Outside, the tension was mirrored by the growing unrest on the streets. A group of local residents, armed with smartphones and signs, gathered outside the store to protest against the intimidation tactics that had plagued the neighborhood. Their chants, "Stand for our soul" and "No to intimidation," echoed through the cold air, reinforcing the message that the community would not be silenced. Back in the meeting room, as the night wore on, the group began drafting a preliminary plan for the outreach task force. They identified key components: establishing a secure hotline for anonymous tips about harassment, creating a schedule for volunteers to patrol the area, and initiating a fund to assist those in need. Mr. Thompson, the once skeptical business owner, surprisingly offered a portion of his resources to support the initiative, saying, "If this is going to save our community, I'm willing to invest in our future." His unexpected support helped bridge the gap between the purely pragmatic and the passionately idealistic. With each proposal and every contribution, the task force's framework took shape. Evelyn felt a surge of hope. This was a turning point. The very community that had been divided was now uniting under the banner of compassion, ready to challenge the dark forces that threatened to undermine their way of life. As the meeting drew to a close, Councilwoman Ramirez summarized the collective decision with resolute clarity. "We will not be intimidated. We will build a community that honors both its heritage and its future. This is our stand against cruelty and neglect, and we will see it through together." In the final moments of the meeting, as plans were distributed and the group prepared to disperse into the cool night, Evelyn took a moment to step outside her store. She looked up at the starless sky and the flickering streetlights, feeling the profound weight of responsibility, but also the undeniable strength of a united community. The stray dog, now a familiar figure pacing the alley, trotted past the doorway as if acknowledging the new chapter unfolding. In that quiet, charged moment, Evelyn knew that the coming days would test their unity, but she was ready to lead with compassion, resilience, and unwavering resolve. One chilly evening, as a bitter wind whipped through the narrow alley behind Evelyn's store, the cumulative pressures and threats that had been mounting over the past weeks finally coalesced into a moment of electrifying tension. The community task force, now more established and resolute than ever, had gathered at the renovated community center for one final emergency session. The air in the room was thick with anticipation and anxiety, every face illuminated by the dim glow of overhead lights and the flicker of determination. At the front of the room, Councilwoman Ramirez reviewed the latest alarming reports. Anonymous messages had grown increasingly explicit, and there were fresh accounts of suspicious vehicles and vandalism near both Evelyn's store and Mr. Harlan's building. "Our community is under siege," she declared, her voice echoing in the hushed space. "The forces behind these threats are escalating their tactics. We have evidence now that they are willing to use physical intimidation to silence our voices. We must prepare for a final push to protect our neighbors and our heritage." As she spoke, a heavy silence descended on the room. Evelyn, who had been present from the early hours, felt her heart pound in her chest. Every new threat, From the spray-painted warnings on her store's back wall to the chilling texts received in the dead of night, had converged to this point. She recalled the image of the stray dog, bandaged but undeterred, making its daily journey as if to defy the darkness that threatened to overrun them all. In a corner of the room, Olivia Reed, leader of the community outreach group, unfolded a detailed map on the wall. The map, covered in markers and annotations, highlighted key locations of previous threats: the alley near the store, Mr. Harlan's building, and even several points around the community center itself. "We've established a network of volunteers who will keep watch tonight," Olivia explained, her tone both firm and hopeful. "But we must also be ready to act if these threats materialize into physical harm." Her eyes met Evelyn's, silently urging her to stay strong. Across town, the tension was mirrored on the streets. Groups of local residents and business owners had mobilized, setting up barricades and organizing a night watch near Evelyn's store and other vulnerable spots. Smartphones were raised in unison to document any suspicious activity. Social media feeds buzzed with live updates and impassioned pleas. "Stand with us and don't let fear win." The digital chorus became a powerful reminder that the community was not alone in its struggle. Inside the community center, the discussion soon turned to contingency plans. A local security expert, Mr. Jenkins, proposed a coordinated response if any acts of vandalism or harassment escalated. "We need to have a rapid response team on standby," he urged. "If we see any sign of physical intimidation, our volunteers must know exactly who to call and where to move." His pragmatic suggestions were met with nods of agreement, but also with palpable apprehension. Everyone in the room understood that the next few hours could change everything. As the meeting progressed, a sudden commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. A visibly shaken volunteer burst into the room, clutching his phone. "There's been another incident," he cried. A car with tinted windows was seen circling the block near Evelyn's store, and there are reports of harsh language shouted at someone who was checking on the area. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as the volunteer relayed the details. Councilwoman Ramirez's face hardened with determination, and she immediately ordered the task force to intensify their monitoring. Evelyn's mind raced as she recalled the series of ominous events that had brought them to this point. The anonymous warnings, the vandalism, the palpable fear that had seeped into every corner of her daily life. Each incident had been a piece of a larger puzzle. Now, with these new reports in hand, she realized that the dark forces opposing their efforts were preparing for a decisive move. "This is it," she murmured to herself, clenching her fists. "They're trying to break our spirit." In that charged atmosphere, Mr. Harlan, once known as Hal Mason, joined the meeting virtually via a shaky video call. His frail face appeared on the screen, but his voice was resolute. "I may be old and weakened, but I will not be silenced," he declared, his eyes burning with defiant strength. "I have lived through loss and neglect, and I know what it means to be forgotten. But tonight I ask you all to remember that every one of us matters. We must stand together, or we risk losing everything we hold dear." His words, raw with emotion, brought a hushed reverence to the room. As the meeting drew to a close, Councilwoman Ramirez summarized the collective resolve. "We are at the precipice of a turning point. If we are to protect our community and reclaim our heritage, we must be ready to face these threats head-on. Tonight, we stand united against intimidation and cruelty. We will not allow fear to dictate our future." With those final words, the task force dispersed into the night, each volunteer and community member steeling themselves for what might come. Stepping out into the cold night air, Evelyn paused for a moment in front of her store. The neon sign flickered above her as the stray dog emerged from the shadows, making its slow, determined way past the familiar door. In that brief, poignant moment, Evelyn felt a surge of both fear and unwavering hope. The dog's silent perseverance had become a beacon, a small, defiant light in the darkness. Every step she took echoed with the resolve of her community, the promise to stand together in the face of adversity, to protect the vulnerable, and to preserve the dignity of every soul. As she locked the door behind her, Evelyn whispered softly, "We won't be silenced. We will fight for our community, for Mr. Harlan, and for every lost heart that still believes in kindness." The night was heavy with the weight of uncertainty, But in the unity of their shared purpose, there was also the spark of an impending revolution, a revolution that would soon culminate in a decisive, transformative moment. Under a sky churning with dark, heavy clouds and a biting wind that whipped through the narrow alleys, the community's simmering tensions finally exploded into a moment of raw confrontation. That fateful evening, as the clock neared 8 p.m., a sudden act of vandalism at Evelyn's store set the stage for what would become the defining turning point of the entire story. Evelyn had just closed her store when she discovered that the back wall had been defaced with aggressive graffiti, harsh words that warned her to stop caring and mind your business. The sight of the crude, spray-painted messages made her heart race with fear and anger. It wasn't just another act of intimidation. It was a declaration from the dark forces that had been lurking behind the anonymous threats and unsettling incidents over the past weeks. With trembling hands, she gathered her few loyal employees and immediately alerted the community task force, which had been monitoring every hint of harassment. Outside, as the neon lights of the store flickered in the cold but relentless drizzle, a small crowd of local residents, neighbors, business owners, and even previously indifferent shoppers had already begun gathering. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces set in determination. Many clutched smartphones, ready to record every moment, while others quietly formed a human chain around the building. The energy was palpable, charged with the urgency of a community that had had enough. At the heart of the gathering, Councilwoman Ramirez took to a makeshift stage set up on the store's steps. With a voice that resonated over the murmur of anxious conversation, she declared, "This is our moment. We will not allow threats or intimidation to steal our compassion. Today we stand united for every forgotten soul, every lonely heart, and for the dignity of our community." Her words, delivered with fierce conviction, ignited a roar of agreement from the crowd. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the commotion, Mr. Harlan, now revealed as the once respected Hal Mason, watched the scene with a mix of trepidation and pride. His eyes, still brimming with the pain of years spent in isolation, shone with a renewed spark as he observed the solidarity around Evelyn's store. For him, the stray dog's gentle daily offerings had been a lifeline, a reminder that even in the depths of despair, kindness could still prevail. As the human chain tightened and the community task force began coordinating with local law enforcement, a sudden movement in the shadows drew everyone's attention. The stray dog, the silent hero of the story, emerged from the dark alley once again. Despite the drizzle and the chill, it trotted determinedly toward the store, its ragged fur and bandaged paw bearing the marks of hardship, yet undeterred by adversity. In that instant, its appearance became a powerful symbol, a living reminder that the smallest act of defiance can inspire a revolution of compassion. Just then, a black sedan pulled up slowly near the entrance. Out stepped a man in a dark jacket, his eyes scanning the gathered crowd. For a moment, a hush fell over the assembly as whispers spread that the intimidating forces behind the earlier threats had finally come face to face with the community. The man advanced toward Evelyn, his gait measured and his expression unreadable. "Miss Carter," he said in a low, menacing tone that sent shivers through the onlookers, "this ends tonight. Your interference in our business is no longer tolerated." His words, laden with threat, sparked a murmur of discontent and fear. Without hesitation, Councilwoman Ramirez stepped forward, her voice unwavering as she addressed the intruder. "You will not intimidate us any longer. We have every right to protect our community, our heritage, and our neighbors. Your time of hiding behind anonymous threats is over." The tension in the air was thick as the man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment it seemed that a physical confrontation was imminent. At that critical juncture, Officer Daniels and his team, who had been quietly positioned around the scene, moved in swiftly. In a flurry of coordinated action, they approached the man and, after a brief but forceful exchange, detained him. The man's threats were cut short by the resolute authority of law enforcement, and his capture marked a decisive blow against the forces of intimidation. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, their collective spirit bolstered by the visible victory over fear. In the ensuing moments, as the detained man was led away and the community's task force resumed its watch, Evelyn stood at the doorway of her store, her eyes brimming with tears. not just of relief, but of profound hope. The stray dog, now momentarily by her side, nudged her hand gently as if offering silent reassurance. In that instant, Evelyn realized that every act of courage, every defiant step taken by a small creature had sparked a chain reaction that united a fragmented community. Councilwoman Ramirez addressed the gathered crowd one last time, her voice echoing with both triumph and a call for continued vigilance. Today, we have shown that when we stand together, no threat, no matter how dark, can silence the light of compassion. Let this night be a reminder that our strength lies in our unity. We will continue to protect our community and ensure that every vulnerable soul is given the dignity they deserve. As the first hints of dawn began to break through the stormy sky, the people dispersed slowly, their hearts lighter and their resolve firmer than ever. The events of the night had reached a cathartic climax, a turning point where fear was met with bravery and intimidation with unwavering solidarity. Evelyn, standing in the cool morning air, looked up at the clearing sky and whispered, "We won't be silenced. We will keep fighting for our community, for every forgotten soul, and for the hope that lives in every small act of kindness." As the early morning light began to wash away the shadows of the previous night, the events that had transformed a simple act of following a stray dog into a profound community movement started to settle into a hopeful new chapter. Evelyn Carter's store, once a quiet business on a busy street, had become the heart of a movement, a beacon where compassion, community, and practicality converged to heal old wounds and forge new bonds. In the days that followed the dramatic confrontation at the town hall and the subsequent decisive actions taken by the community, the energy of unity was palpable. The task force established to monitor threats had successfully maintained a steady watch over the neighborhood, and local law enforcement had taken firm steps to dismantle the intimidation network. Councilwoman Ramirez's impassioned speeches had resonated deeply with residents, igniting a newfound pride and determination in preserving the community's heritage while still welcoming progress. For Evelyn, the journey had been deeply personal. Every time she looked into the eyes of the stray dog as it trotted past her store, every memory of the gentle old man, once known as Hal Mason, now living as Mr. Harlan, and every heartfelt conversation with her neighbors reinforced that the smallest acts of kindness could spark monumental change. Reflecting on those moments, she realized that what began as frustration over missing goods had evolved into an inspiring mission of reconnecting the community. Her store had transformed from a place solely focused on commerce into a hub of hope, a place where bulletin boards were filled not only with sale notices, but also with information about local support services, community events, and stories of everyday heroes. Mrs. Jenkins, whose tender care had once given Bella a second chance, now found solace in the community's support. At a quiet memorial gathering in the local park, she tearfully recounted how the stray dog's discreet acts of kindness had rekindled her belief in humanity. "I always thought the world had forgotten us," she said, her voice wavering with both sorrow and hope. "But now I see that when we come together, every lost soul is given a chance to be remembered." Her words resonated with many who had experienced neglect and isolation, and they served as a powerful reminder that the bonds of empathy can transcend even the deepest divides. Meanwhile, Mr. Harlan, once forced into the shadows as a forgotten Hal Mason, began to experience a quiet renaissance. With the support of Evelyn and the outreach programs organized by local volunteers, he slowly reconnected with his past and rediscovered a sense of purpose. Regular visits from community volunteers, gentle phone calls from concerned neighbors, and even small tokens of kindness left by those who admired his resilience all contributed to a gradual rebuilding of his self-worth. In one particularly moving moment during a community luncheon, he expressed, "For the first time in many years, I feel seen and valued. I may have been cast aside, but today I am part of something bigger, a community that cares." The media, which had once sensationalized the story of the stray dog's mysterious behavior, now began to shift the narrative. Sarah's investigative reports, once filled with urgency and tension, had evolved into thoughtful pieces that celebrated the community's capacity for compassion. Her articles were widely shared on social media, sparking conversations about how even small acts can galvanize social change. In her latest report, she reflected, "This is a story of transformation, a story where a stray dog's daily act of kindness not only nourished a forgotten man, but also ignited a movement." It reminds us that even in our most indifferent moments, empathy can break through the coldest barriers. As local authorities worked to implement stricter measures to protect vulnerable residents and ensure that businesses could operate safely, the redevelopment plans that once threatened to disrupt the community were revised to incorporate affordable housing, community centers, and preservation of historical landmarks. The old building known as the Hearth was slated to be transformed into a cultural hub, a living reminder of the neighborhood's past generosity and a cornerstone for future community initiatives. Standing outside her store on a crispy, clear morning, Evelyn took a deep breath and smiled as she watched the stray dog, its fur ruffled by the gentle breeze, make its usual pilgrimage past her doorway. Every step it took was a silent affirmation that hope could be found even in the darkest corners. In that quiet moment, Evelyn felt the full weight of her journey, a journey that had forced her to confront painful truths, overcome formidable obstacles, and ultimately unite a fractured community through the power of compassion. Before you go, we invite you to join this movement of hope and kindness. If Evelyn's story, the remarkable journey of a stray dog, and the inspiring transformation of a community have touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, give this video a thumbs up, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us how acts of compassion have made a difference in your life, and share ideas on how communities can work together to protect those who need it most. And don't forget to watch our next video, where we explore how local initiatives continue to bring positive change to neighborhoods across the country. Every subscription, share, and comment helps spread the message that even the smallest act of kindness can ignite hope in a world that needs it more than ever. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay kind, stay compassionate, and let's continue building a better world, one act of generosity at a time.